Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. If you watching right now are a cast member that I am commenting on, please do not take what I'm saying as a replacement for therapy in particular. I could see how it might come across that way. I'm just speculating on the edit. I have no idea who you are. So, keep that in mind. Let's watch.
I brought the scissors. What are we making, Poppy?
They're like little figures, I guess. I have like 6 of them now.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Fabian invited me to visit him in Jersey, and I need to talk to Daniel before I go because I don't like to hide things from him.
All right, so to catch you up, Tiffany was with Ronald a few seasons back, and he's from South Africa. They had a lot of conflict, which if you watched, you remember at least some of it. Tiffany has a son, Daniel, from a previous relationship before she was with Ronald. And we can see now that Daniel is a little older. It's interesting to see him age. And from the past, and then she had another kid with Ronald. And now she and the other kid and Daniel live in the States, and Ronald is still in South Africa. And Tiffany is dating a man from Colombia, and things are going kind of well in it. And he was someone that she knew from before Ronald, I think, if I remember right. And so we remember that with Daniel, at least it's hard to know because the show doesn't give us that much data, but it looked like Daniel had been parentified. And so what's parentification? Well, it depends on the type, but the type that Daniel seemed to exhibit was someone that had to grow up too fast, someone that due to circumstances in the family and the parenting and attunement, he had, as a young child, a number of choices that he could have made to cope with what he was dealing with, which is, it's hard to know exactly what that was, but I'm going to take a guess and say that it was some level of chaos that was preventing Tiffany from being able to be fully attuned to him and have enough time for him or emotional resources or something. And so, or Tiffany was suffering a lot with relationships or other kinds of things, or she has bad boundaries and is enmeshed with him and confides in him too much. And so Daniel, I don't know about any of that stuff, really. I think any of those could be possible given the little bit that we've seen of her life from the show. But Daniel exhibits signs, and they're not solid signs, but they're minor signs that he's been parentified, meaning, and he is of the type that has grown up very fast. He talks very mature, and he seems very concerned about what's going on with his parents and knows a lot about Tiffany's life and is worried about it. Now, should kids or can kids his age, I think last time we saw him, he would have been 10. I think maybe he's around 12 now. I'm not sure. Last time we saw him, that age, there's nothing wrong with the kid being concerned or even knowing a little bit about the parents' personal lives. But when children are burdened with it, and it's too early, given the age appropriateness of that information, then it can create too much anxiety for the child, too much fear, too much responsibility, too much expectation put on them to take care of other people or to monitor what's going on. If you have a parent that seems out of control and you care about your parent, you don't want them to shoot themselves in the foot, and you might see that often. Plus, selfishly, you're worried about yourself because you're a child and you know it. You know that you don't really have any power in the world, and so all of your safety generates from that parent if it's a single parent situation. And you might concern yourself very much with your parents' life and their emotional well-being and trying to guide them, trying to support them. And it can look to the Tiffany's of the world like, I have the most mature son. He's so nice. And other people from the outside might even see that. Teachers might even say it's like, because Daniel might go to school and become very codependent and codependent in the real sense of the word, where you're oriented to take care of other people, essentially. Listen to my whole deep dive on it. But if he was like that with his teachers, the teachers might actually really appreciate him because he's very caring and he notices the emotional state that the teachers are in, and none of the other kids seem to care. So the teachers might say to Tiffany, "You're raising such a great kid. He's so caring and concerning and empathetic and helpful and mature, and he talks like he's a little man." Those are all good qualities, but they're massive signs that something is being sacrificed. There's a reason why 10-year-olds act like they're 10. There's a reason why 10-year-olds don't exhibit a ton of empathy towards adults, because they're not ready for that. They're too concerned with themselves because they're 10. They should be concerned with themselves. If you ever have a kid that is very concerned about adults' emotional state, that's not a sign of maturity or of something that's good. It could be. I mean, there are kids that are raised relatively well and secure, and they have that sort of extra capacity to take care of others, but they definitely are able to take care of themselves and be a child. So, I don't know. I just thought I'd catch y'all up before we watch this scene, because I haven't seen Daniel, I think, in a few years.
See? Okay, it's fine. You're a beginner, so.
Another thing you'll hear from parents who are enmeshed with their child and the child is being parentified is that the parents will say, "We're best friends. It's so great. We hang out, we talk. I mean, it's so great. You know, my friends and their kids, they're not best friends with their kids. I'm best friends with my kid. How great is that?" And yeah, closeness is good and having fun together is fantastic, but what's being sacrificed? There's a possibility that a lot is being sacrificed. His childhood, his innocence, his focus on himself, his safety, and a lot of other things.
It's fine, so.
Sorry.
Being a single mom, no one has a book that tells you like what's the right way to do it.
So this is a funny thing. Up until recently, I would have agreed with that, but I was at a comic or someone said, actually, there are thousands of books about how to parent. You know, because you often hear that phrase. They'll be like, you know, when you have kids, they don't come with an owner's manual. And in one sense, it's true because your particular kid doesn't come with an owner's manual, but there have been thousands of books that are giving you tons of guidance and advice. And I would guess that a lot of the books are pretty good, honestly. I don't know that, but of the books that I've come across, well, I shouldn't say that. There are some books that have some really, really dubious advice that I've seen. But a lot of them are fine. And at the very least, I would imagine most contemporary parenting books would talk about attachment and attunement and allowing the kid to live stress-free and not dumping your life on them, that kind of thing. So, you know, she says, they don't come with a manual. And it's like, well, they kind of do.
But I would much rather me tell him myself that I've begun dating versus him finding out on his own and feeling like he can't trust me.
Right. So that's not bad, right? That's not irrational. It's not a bad premise to follow as a parent. But if you're using it as an excuse to share with him, because I don't know, but when there's enmeshment, especially when it's a single mother, a single child, and they were in that scenario for a long time before she had her second child, and I think her second kid's like 2 years oldish, then you will see, you know, think Colt and Debbie, that sort of thing. You will see the parent over depending. You know, what I would get called into a lot of these homes with these. At the beginning of my career, about a third of my clients were in home, and I would say, I don't know, maybe 25%-ish of those clients were a son who was around his age, maybe 14, and a single mother. And the amount of conflict they were experiencing, like, even though Daniel seems really nice right now, there's a chance that when he turns 14 and he starts to individuate and that pressure to become his own person starts to really dominate his personality, he might turn on Tiffany for a variety of reasons. And that I would see that happening. all of that resentment that they've been pushing down, all that anger and injustice that they've been feeling about being imposed upon, and all that anxiety and stress, they just turn immediate and just be like, no. But they lack the sense of self. They lack the emotional regulation because they were never allowed to develop that. They also have a lot of fear about separating and guilt about separating from their parents. And so they really struggle internally, externally, back and forth. And a lot of really negative things can happen. Drug abuse, grades can go down, running away from home, self-destructive behavior, this kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm not saying Daniel's doomed, but I've seen it happen. And one of the elements of that I would hear, because I would get these families when the kid was 14 and they hated each other, but I would hear that I don't understand, for the first 12 years of his life, we were best friends and I could tell him anything and we were really close. So the way I would interpret that was they, for whatever reason, had created this little cocoon, this world that the two of them were in. And since there were no other adults around, the single parent didn't really have a guide to understand what was happening. And stuff is going on in the adult's life. And so they just want to tell someone about what's happening. And since the only other human that they live with and really trust is their kid, they confide in their kid. If they had closer relationships, particularly living with them, a friend, a partner, a parent, a cousin, they would likely go to the adult. But since there is no adult around, they just by default, and then it creates this routine, right? And then sometimes that creates for the kid a desire to know more, because the more they know, the less anxiety they feel. When they feel left out, the child feels like, well, one, they feel like they're being rejected, and two, because it's not normal for them to not know everything about their mother or parent, but also because it's their job to monitor the situation, and in order for them to monitor, they must know what's happening. And so the child will often invade, and then the parent will feel bad. Will be like, oh, yeah, I'm being a jerk face. Yes, kid, I will tell you everything about my dating life. I don't know what's happening right here, but I'm just throwing that out there. Maybe we can see some signs.
I wanted to mention something to you. About, probably divorce and separation. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard time. But I feel like you're always asking me, like, if I'm going to go on dates.
Oh, yeah.
Again, nothing wrong with a kid being curious about that for a variety of reasons. He'd have to make plans for babysitters or something. But it could be along those lines of what I'm talking about, that he considers it his job to monitor things and has a lot of anxiety about it. And it certainly would impact his life if she started to date again, because her behavior and her track record has been kind of chaotic, shall we say. Not terribly. There's, people have their lives, but so we're hearing that bit there that he's always asking, are you going to go on dates? Yeah. If I heard that, I would say that's a pretty good chance that he has anxiety. It's coming from a place of anxiety. Now, there's nothing wrong with telling your kid that you're dating. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm going on a date tonight. People tend to get bogged down in these kind of rules. The key is, what is the experience of your child? If you tell your kid, hey, I'm going out on a date on Friday with a new man, and you give a little bit of details. I met him at work and he seems like a nice guy. If your child is like, interesting. Anyway, let me tell you about me. That, especially, I don't know about his age, but up until 10, that would be normal. The kid will register it, might have a little bit of anxiety about it, might have some questions, but ultimately they are allowed to be a kid, and they don't feel responsible for investigating. They don't feel responsible for monitoring. They don't even know what questions to ask, frankly. They're just like, that's kind of adult stuff. What do people do on dates? I don't care. Anyway, back to my toys and my friends and you paying attention to me and my life. That would be a different experience than if a parent says, I'm going on a date on a Friday, and the kid is like, well, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? And what's the experience? Is it anxiety? Is it a sense of I need to control the situation? What's happening? So which one is that for Daniel? Maybe we'll get a sense.
Obviously, I'm always asking if you're going to go on a date or not, because after you and Dad separated, I just didn't trust anyone.
And that's normal too. And that's just going to happen through divorce, even if you do everything well, because he had bonded a lot to Ronald. He had poured a lot of his needs into Ronald, right? And so, yeah, that's a huge loss for him. And maybe that's how he's expressing his loss. We would like to hope that Tiffany could have been a little bit more careful with dating and making sure that things would work out with Ronald before she even introduced him to Daniel. But, those kind of things happen sometimes. So at least we're hearing that bit.
You didn't trust anyone for me?
Yeah.
So you don't want me to date anyone?
I do. It's just
So you do
slow
want me to
down
date
a bit. First, get to know.
All right, let's rewind this. But the sequence is a little troubling. And I don't know if they edited it, but he expresses like, "Hey, yeah, I'm always asking about you dating because of what happened with Ronald, and by implication, I really bonded with Ronald, and then everything fell apart, and I'm affected by that." And then her next statement or question is, "So you don't want me to be dating?" You see, I would hope that she would say, "Yeah, Daniel, I'm sorry about that," because I think that was a bid for safety. It's like, "Mom, are we safe? Are you driving the ship into another iceberg, or are we safe? And do you care about my feelings? Do you recognize what you did to me? I mean, I had nothing to do with any of that. You did that whole thing, but I was affected by." So you would hope that Tiffany would have some time, and maybe she did, and they edited it out. But let's rewind.
Hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard time. But I feel like you're always asking me like if I'm gonna go on dates.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, I'm always asking you if you're going to go on a date or not, because after you and Dad separated, I just didn't trust anyone.
You didn't trust anyone for me?
Yeah.
So you don't want me to date anyone?
I do.
Yeah. Do you see? And I also wonder if this is a pattern that's been developing, that due to the pressures put on him, and this will happen sometimes, there's different paths for parentified children. One is they will actually become dominant and might even, as they age, become abusive to their parents. And I don't know if we're heading in that direction, and she's trying to draw a boundary with him, not realizing that there's a much bigger thing that needs to be addressed. I don't know. It's impossible for me to know. I mean, everything could be going well. I'm just going off of very little information.
Just
So you do
slow
want me to
down
date
a bit. First, get to know them, because when you first started dating Ronald, then you just didn't even think about it. You just got straight into it. And then you found out his true side, and then, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hope you see it in the way that he talks to her. I don't know how old he is. Tops 11, right? I think. And he is talking the way a dad or an older brother would talk. Even his facial expressions. I don't think I had that in my repertoire until I was 35. I mean, that the way that he talks to her is like, "So,
trust anyone for me?
Yeah.
So you don't want me to date anyone?
I do. It's just
So you do
slow
want me to
down
date
a bit. First, get to know them, because when you first started dating Ronald, then you just didn't even think about it. You just got straight into it. And then you found out his true side, and then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all I hear is Daniel expressing sadness and anger about what happened, which is totally natural, right? And I would hope that Tiffany, this is one snippet of one moment, but I would hope in other moments Tiffany would be like, "Yeah, buddy, I'm so sorry. That's my fault. And you're right. And you don't have to worry about that. I'm going to therapy. I'm talking with other people about it to make sure that I don't rush into things. You do not have to worry about that, honey. But you're right that I did rush into it. And I learned my lesson, and I'm not going to do that again, mainly for your sake, but also for my sake, right? And our other, the other kid's sake. I think it's a daughter. For your sister's sake." And that's what you say. the damage has already been done because he already knows about everything and there was that situation. So you can't just ignore it, which would be the preference, honestly. Daniel, it'd be best. So best case scenario with Ronald would have been that Tiffany met him online and they hit it off over texting and phone. And then she thinks, wow, I mean, this might be the guy, but I barely know him because we have not spent any time in person. Plus, he's just coming off of a massive gambling addiction, and I don't know where he's at with his life. So now, best case scenario, she would say, he's in South Africa. So there's millions of people in my country that are closer by that would be much easier to vet for the sake of my child. But let's say that she's like, no, he's the one. Then she says to her son, Daniel, I'm going to South Africa to meet someone. It's someone that I might be dating, just so you know, because you might hear grandma talking about it or something. But don't worry, because, it's mainly a vacation to have fun. And I'm also just going to meet a friend and see if we might be compatible. But don't worry about a thing. I'm going slow. And then she goes down to South Africa. She dates him, experiences what's going on. She comes back. Maybe she goes back there, dates him for another few weeks, sees what's going on, comes back. It's not great that Daniel doesn't have his mom during that time, but, hopefully Daniel has other people. And then only after the relationship has been fully vetted does she start to introduce Daniel to the notion that, you know what, his name's Ronald, and maybe the two of you should hang out. Probably by that point, she would have known that their relationship was pretty rocky, and thus she should be very careful about, one, getting pregnant, and two, introducing to Daniel, involving Daniel in it, and having Daniel be affected by the potential chaos that could happen, right? Daniel doesn't have to know any of that stuff. He doesn't need to know any of it. Now, some kids will unfade that, but that's probably because they were parentified prior to that, and I've worked on that with families to try to reverse the trend with kids. But so that would have been best case scenario, but that didn't happen. So the cat's out of the bag. So there's a different way of responding now, which is the other role play I did, which is to say, something along the lines of, I'm working on it. Don't worry about it. You don't have to ask if I'm dating. I know what you're worried about, and you have every right to be worried. You have every right to be angry at me. You have every right to be sad that you don't have Ronald around. It's sad to me too, but mainly I'm sad for you because you didn't have anything to do with it. This is all my fault. But I hear you. So it's one directional mainly. It's the parent taking care of the child, right? Now, Tiffany might want to go into the closet and cry, or go to a friend or a therapist and cry after that moment, but in the moment, it's focused on Daniel and his needs.
You just didn't even think about it. You just got straight into it. And you found out his true side, and then, yeah.
And the other thing that I saw in my clinical practice, I don't know if this is what's happening, but it's possible that Daniel is actually starting to turn into a more hostile, angry position towards Tiffany, a resentment, which can absolutely happen. You kind of hear it in his voice, right? All right, well, that is for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.